our website. So those who could not make it today have a way of hearing about the program or experiencing the program at a later date. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. My name is Jen Hicks. I am the Director of Communications and Outreach with Maine Woodland Owners. This is one of the many online programs that Maine Woodland Owners has been offering this year, this spring. And we're thrilled to have Elissa Ballman here. She is the Citizen Scientist Coordinator at the University of Maine at the Maine ForestTickSurvey. And she and her colleagues have been working to develop this program, working with woodlot owners in Maine to collect ticks, to study them, and to provide information, important information for woodlot owners to use as they spend time in their woods and stay safe from the ticks and the pathogens that they spread. So we know this is a really important topic for a lot of people, especially those who spend a lot of time in their woods. And so I think you could probably ask Elissa most questions and she'll have a good answer for you. Or for the really hard questions, maybe she even knows the resources and the people who could answer the science, the scientists that she works with as well. So it's a wonderful resource. We're glad to have her. We're glad we have it here in Maine. And I foresee a long relationship with this program here with Maine Woodland Owners. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass over the torch to Elissa. Elissa's going to do a slideshow, so and we'll take a break periodically to answer any questions. But I encourage anybody who has a burning question while she's talking to go ahead and send a message on the chat feature. Like I said, on the right, if you click on chat, you'll see a box opens up and you have a place to type. And send it to everyone so we can all see the questions. And I will make sure Elissa's going to get the questions if she's not able to focus on the chat. So that's a good way to communicate. And I also imagine that if you're not able to get your question in, or if you find you had a question after the presentation's over, Elissa's going to be available on email to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, terrific. Elissa, thanks again. And the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all of you for coming out this afternoon to learn more about ticks here in Maine. So before let me see, hopefully you can all see my screen. Nod heads, you can see it? Okay, thank you. So before I go into the research, I just want to talk about the lab that I work in. So I work in the vector biology lab at the University of Maine. And this lab is led by Dr. Ali Gardner. And the focus of this lab is to study the ecology of infectious diseases that are transmitted by arthropod vectors, such as ticks, which is what I'll be focusing on today. But they also do research into mosquitoes as well. So here's the agenda of what the talk is going to be for today. I'm going to start by talking about the tick species we have here in the state, the pathogens that they carry, and then I want to get into some tick behavior and ecology, which I think is the really interesting stuff. Then I'll talk about some tick protection, so how you can protect yourself and what you can maybe do to your property to help protect yourself against ticks that way. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the Maine ForestTickSurvey. And this is the citizen science project that we're launching this summer. And I know some of you may have been involved, or maybe you signed up to be involved, and we're starting to select volunteers for that right now. Okay, so let's get started by talking about the different tick species we have and the pathogens here in the state. So Maine has about 15 different species of ticks. And of those, the vast majority of them have really little to no impact on human health. Our most common tick species are the black-legged tick, which is also commonly called the deer tick. The correct actual name of this tick is the black-legged tick. So for this presentation, I'm going to call it the black-legged tick, but I know a lot of people know it as a deer tick. We also have a lot of American dog ticks and woodchuck ticks. And we have a fairly new species called the Lone Star tick. And you may have heard a bit about this one. It's been making a lot of the rounds in the news cycles. And the reason people are so interested / concerned about having this tick in Maine is that we know in other states, it transmits a large number of pathogens to humans. So you can see, I know Rocky Mountain spotted fever is a big problem, especially south of us. And so this is a tick that they're starting to find in southern Maine. We don't know if it's fully established yet, but we are starting to see it more common. So if it's not fully established yet, I think there's a good chance it's going to be in the future. So of the ones that we currently have that are common here in Maine, the black-legged tick is the one that vectors the vast majority of pathogens to humans. So this is the only tick in the state that transmits Lyme disease. Also transmits anaplasmosis and babesiosis, which are two tick-borne diseases that are on the rise in the state, as well as a few other rarer ones. So you can see the American dog tick and the woodchuck tick, they are capable of transmitting a couple of different pathogens, but these are very rarely seen in Maine. So these ticks aren't considered a really large human health risk compared to the black-legged tick. So because the black-legged tick is so important in human health, I want to spend a little more time talking about this species. So the scientific name of black-legged tick is Exoides scapularis. And if we look at this map of the United States, these areas in red, those are counties that have established populations of the black-legged tick. So you can see that's all of Maine. And then the areas in blue are the areas that some ticks have been reported, but they're not thought to be established there yet. And these colors represent a different species that they have out west. So they have a similar species to ours that also transmit Lyme disease. So they do have Lyme disease out west. It's just transmitted by a different tick species. So I wanted to walk you through the life cycle of the black-legged tick. And it's a really cool life cycle because it's this 2-year life cycle. And so we start here in the spring with the eggs. So the adults have just laid their eggs. And then early in the summer, these eggs hatch into what's called the larval form. And it's important to note this larval form is not born with any pathogens. So if its mother had pathogens in her life, she doesn't pass them on to her offspring. So the first chance that this larvae has to pick up any pathogens is when it takes its first blood meal. And so it's going to look to take a blood meal from a small host like rodents or small birds. And this is the first opportunity it has to pick up one of these pathogens. So after the nymph gets its first blood meal, it's going to just hang out in the forest leaf litter in the understory, and it's going to overwinter and not do very much. And then it'll emerge in the spring and it'll molt to the nymphal stage. And this point, this stage of the black-legged tick life cycle is considered the most sort of dangerous for human health because first of all, we know it potentially picked up a pathogen when it had its first blood meal. And when it's going to go for its second blood meal, it's going to feed on a variety of hosts, both small like the rodents and mice, but also larger ones like deer, or they could find themselves on humans. And they're such a high risk tick in terms of transmitting pathogens because they're so teeny tiny that it's really hard for us to find them crawling, and you can even have them embedded and it's hard to see. So these ticks are about the size of a poppy seed traditionally, so they're easy to miss. And so after that nymph takes its blood meal, it's going to molt to the adult stage. And these adults are going to need one final blood meal. And it typically takes a blood meal off larger hosts like deer or humans. And then it's going to overwinter one last time and then emerge in the spring, lay its eggs, and start the life cycle over. So Lyme disease, I think most people at this point are aware that it is a problem, especially here in New England, and it's a growing problem. So Lyme disease is actually caused by a bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi, and it's a bacteria that the black-legged tick, again, is the one that transmits. Lyme disease is, and this is the most widespread vector-borne disease in the US. There's about 30,000 reported cases each year, but the actual number is probably 10 times that because a lot of cases go unreported. And as you can see on the map, the vast majority of cases are in the Midwest and the Northeast. And so if we look at these two side-by-side maps, these are the number of reported cases of Lyme disease in 2001. yeah, you can see they have some in the Midwest and southern New England, sure, and like a few isolated cases in Maine. And then we fast forward to 2017 and just look at that. Like that is a huge increase in 16 years. And now we're having a lot more cases. And this is a disease that is continuing to rise here in the state of Maine as well. So if we look at Maine in a little more detail, here we have maps. Again, this is the rate of Lyme disease per 100,000 people. So the darker the color, the higher the rate of Lyme disease in that region. So you can see here, this first map is of 2008, and most of the Lyme disease cases are sort of coastal and far southern Maine. And then if we just fast forward by 10 years, here we are at 2018, you can see these Lyme disease cases are really starting to show up more inland, and they're also starting to show up further north. So you can see there's even some cases up in Aroostook County. And so last year, if we look at the ticks that were submitted to the Maine Cooperative Extension, so any ticks that are submitted to them, they're testing them for pathogens. And of all the ticks they tested across the state last year, about 40% of them tested positive for that Lyme bacteria. And in some counties, like in southern and coastal Maine, up to 50% of the ticks they tested carried this Lyme bacteria. So that's kind of a scary number. And then last year, over 2,000 human cases of Lyme disease were reported by the CDC, which broke an all-time high record. That was the most cases that we've had reported in Maine as of yet. And then if we just look at tick-borne diseases over time, you can see here we're graphing it from 2001 to 2019. And this graph did not have 2019 yet, so I manually added it, but this is accurate. It's just why it looks a little funny. And you can see over time, these pathogens definitely fluctuate. Some years are more, some years are less, but the overall trend is still one of increasing. And so like I talked just about Lyme disease, this is, though you can clearly see this is the tick-borne disease that has the highest numbers in the state. Though a couple of other tick-borne diseases, anaplasmosis and babesiosis, are also on the rise, even though they're not quite at the level of Lyme disease yet. So if we just look at some of these tick-borne diseases across the country as a whole, we can see anaplasmosis and babesiosis. They're sort of centered around the Midwest and the New England area, sort of like Lyme, though Maine currently kind of seems to be the more northern range of these diseases. And then other tick-borne diseases are luckily not being found in Maine very often. So ehrlichiosis and Rocky Mountain spotted fever are generally found further south of us. So before I launch into tick behavior and ecology, did anybody have any questions about the tick species in Maine or the pathogens that they carry? Jen, did you get any questions?
No questions yet.
Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to get into tick behavior, and I love insect behavior, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I will. So if you think about tick behavior, we can kind of break it up into 4 different groups. We have questing behavior, which is how ticks find their host. We have feeding behavior, which is how ticks take their blood meals that they need to either molt or ultimately they need for reproduction. And then also, most of the time, ticks are spending the majority of their life off host. So we'll talk a little bit about what they're doing when they're off host. You know, because we always think about ticks when they're on us or on another host, but really most of their life, they're just out in the forest. So I'm hoping you're able to see this video. It might be a little laggy, but I'm hoping it'll be clear for you. So this is what tick questing looks like. So the behavior questing is how ticks find their host. And so what a tick does is it'll crawl up to the top of some vegetation. In this case, it looks like a blade of grass, or maybe the top of like a fallen leaf, and it'll sit there and it'll keep its back legs attached to the plant material, and it'll stick its front legs out. And so basically, as a host walks by, it brushes by it, and the tick will just grab a hold of it and That's how they find their host. So it's important to note, ticks don't jump, they don't fly, they don't fall out of trees on top of you. They're really more of most tick species are a sit and wait. There are some species that are a little more active. And ticks are able to pick up cues like odor and carbon dioxide and movement. So they can kind of cue in on your movement and your body chemistry. These younger ticks I was talking about early, the larvae and nymphs, they tend to quest at a lower level, like in the top of leaf litter, which makes sense because they're looking for those smaller hosts like rodents. Whereas adult ticks will tend to be a little higher up in the forest understory. So they're usually, on small shrubs, blades of grass, usually about knee height. So this is a video that shows how ticks feed. And so after a tick grabs onto a host, it finds a suitable feeding spot, and it'll grab a hold of the skin and cut into it. And once it's able to cut the skin, it inserts its mouth parts in, and then it will begin to feed on the blood of the host. And the problem here is that as it's feeding on the blood of the host, it's also transmitting some of its saliva back into the host. And so that saliva is what's containing some of the bacteria and some of these other pathogens that make us sick. So the tick typically feeds for several days. It varies a little by life stage, and then it'll fall off onto the ground, and it'll either molt to the next stage, or it will begin to think about getting ready for laying eggs. And so if we look here, here's a picture, a close-up on the right-hand side of the tick mouth parts, and you can see all these little backwards facing spines. This almost works like a fishing hook, when you have the barb on there and you can't get it out. The tick works the same way. It has all these backward facing spines, so that's why it's so hard to pull off. All right, so now we're getting into reproduction. So hopefully you're able to see this video. And so this is reproduction of a tick species in the lab. This is not the same species we have here in the US. This is one they have in Europe. And you can see here, the little tiny male is the one on top, and he's mating with a fully engorged female. So this female has had her final blood meal, and now she's mating with this male. And this is a species that is medically important in the UK. So that blood meal that she took is really what nourishes her and her eggs. And she's going to turn all that blood into essentially energy and eggs. And so she'll start laying eggs into one big mass. And once she gets going, but it is a kind of a lengthy process. It can take her several weeks. And you can see that's where the eggs are being laid from, her gonopore. And as she's laying these eggs, she's going to actually use her legs and move the eggs out of the way. And you can see here, she's actually moving the eggs away from the camera's hot lights. So they know, they can sense heat and temperature and humidity. And so, she's a good mom. She's trying to find the best place for her little babies. So they can sense these things, and she'll be doing that in the forest as well. So as she's laying eggs, you can see her body starts to become dented, and it's sort of like a balloon deflating. So she used to be, just this big sack full of blood and eggs, and as she's laying those eggs, her body mass is being used up, and she's going to become sort of more and more shriveled up over time. So here we are a couple weeks into the egg laying process, and she's starting to slow down. You can see most of her body mass has been used up. She's getting pretty shriveled up at this point. And then here we are, just about a month, she lays her last egg. And then after she lays her last egg, she dies. She's finished her life cycle. And so this particular tick laid 1,721 eggs, not bad. And you can see just how incredibly tiny they are. And most tick females are going to lay anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 eggs. And you can see those teeny tiny little larval ticks. And interesting enough, when they first emerge, they have 6 legs, and they don't actually have 8 legs until they molt to the nymphal stage. So I think that's cool. I don't know if you guys are on social media, but I know the last few years I've seen this picture posted a bunch on social media, and people posted it to my Facebook page all the time. And I think the caption said something like, "Oh, if you see this in the woods, it's a tick nest, so make sure you destroy it." That's not a tick nest. We just saw how teeny tiny those eggs are. Like, we're never going to see a mass of tick eggs. I mean, they're going to be under the leaf litter. I would be surprised if anyone's ever come across one and ever. Like, they're just so tiny, you're not going to notice them. So if you see that this year, just ignore it. It's not real.
Melissa, there are a couple questions on the chat. I didn't know if that you had wanted
Yeah,
to
go
bring.
ahead.
There was one I missed, and I'm sorry for
Okay.
David who asked. Do we have the Lone Star tick in Maine? Did you answer that already?
Yes, so we do have the Lone Star tick. It is very new and we don't know if it's fully established. So we are finding some individuals, but we don't, you have to find a certain number of individuals and at certain different life stage before we can definitively say it's established, and we haven't found that yet. I think if it's not established, there's a very good chance it will be at some point.
And then there's another question, and maybe you'll get into this a bit, but why are the cases increasing? Is it climate change, too many deer? Are we diagnosing Lyme's better?
Yeah, all the above.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so part of it is, so the black-legged tick has only been in Maine since the 1980s. So before then, there were no ticks that transmitted Lyme disease. So it's a fairly new tick to Maine, and it has definitely been increasing its host range as a result of probably climate change, but also forest landscape change. So these ticks really thrive with fragmented forests. And as people move sort of out into the wilderness and they build a house or a few little subdivisions, like that sort of habitat is ideal for the ticks and also their hosts. So yes, and deer definitely play a big role in the tick population. We'll get into that in a little more detail as well. Yeah, great questions. All right. So if you think about ticks, they spend the vast majority of their life off host. So about 95% of their life, they aren't feeding on a host. They are living essentially in the forest understory. So they're not doing a whole lot. They're basically just trying to find an environment where they don't dry up and they don't get eaten. They're very sensitive to humidity, which we'll go into a little bit. So they're probably spending most of their time just hanging out in the leaf litter in the forest. Um, but they do have really high mortality, which is great to think about. There's a number of insects that will eat ticks: ants, predatory beetles, nematodes, which are like little parasitic worms that will attack ticks and other insects, and they will use them to reproduce, which kills them. There's also some fungus out there that will kill ticks as well. But even though there's such high mortality, you have to think about the fact that we just saw that one tick laid like 2,000 eggs. So even if a small fraction of those survive, that's plenty enough to keep the population going. So unfortunately, even with the high mortality, it's not enough to keep the population suppressed below health concern levels. Okay. I'm just going to go right into the ecology because it kind of ties up with the behavior, and then I'll answer questions about those two sections after this. So I want to talk about ecology because that's really kind of how we understand how ticks and forest and woodland properties all kind of fit together. It's kind of complicated because there's a lot of different factors in play. So I'll talk some about the tick hosts. I'll talk about the role and the importance of climate and microclimate. And then also I'll talk about the role that plants can actually play in tick populations as well. So let's start with host. There are 125 known hosts in North America for the black-legged tick. And again, this is the one of highest human health concern because it's the only one that's transmitting Lyme disease. Some hosts are better for tick survival than others, and some hosts are more likely to transmit pathogens to the ticks than other hosts are. So if we look at our figure here, we have the different life stages of the tick that we had reviewed earlier. And we can't just think about the ticks and their host because the hosts are also being affected by a number of different factors as well. So for example, if we look at the larvae, they tend to feed on smaller hosts like rodents, and in some parts of the country, lizards, not so much up here, but they are important in other parts of the country. And so the things that affect the host in turn affects the tick. So if you have a really big acorn year, that's a lot of resource availability to your rodents, and that could have a positive impact on these rodent populations, which means the tick population could potentially also be impacted that way. And then you can think about it in an opposite way if we look at the predators. If you have a really strong predator population, these rodents are being consumed and their population is going to be reduced, and that in turn could impact the tick population as well. And then same thing, you know, if you look at adults, the deer are an incredibly important host for the adult ticks. And same thing, you know, if you have a really hard winter and there's not a lot of food and there's a lot of ice, so the deer are having trouble feeding and getting to being able to browse, they could have a, in turn, decreasing tick number or decreasing deer numbers could impact the tick populations as well. So things are very interconnected when you're talking about Lyme disease. Host reservoirs. So a reservoir is an animal that can carry and transmit a tick-borne pathogen. And some of the most important reservoirs in Maine are primarily the white-footed mouse, which is this little guy right here. And this is the range of this mouse across North America. And if you remember the range of the black-legged tick, you see it matches up pretty good with this mouse's range. Other important reservoirs here in the state are chipmunks and shrews. So these are ones that will readily carry the different vectors and the different bacterias that the ticks can pick up. And they're also a really good host for the ticks to feed on them. And it's really interesting and important to note that the Lyme bacteria has no effect on mouse survival. It's so interesting. So we get the Lyme bacteria, our dogs get the Lyme bacteria, we get sick, they get sick. The Lyme bacteria does not affect the mouse. They don't get sick. And so that's one of the reasons they're such a good reservoir, is that they can get that bacteria from a tick bite. They're totally fine. It has no impact on survival. And so then over time during their life, they'll pick up more ticks and they'll affect those new ticks as well. There is something you can think about as a protective host, and these are hosts that will kill or groom large number of ticks off themselves. So turkeys and possums are known to be protective hosts. These are ones that tend to kill the ticks that are on their bodies. And if we look at this study that was conducted here in 2009, these individuals were studying the proportion of larval ticks that were able to successfully feed, and they looked at a variety of different hosts. So they looked at a mouse, a couple of species of birds, a couple other rodents, and a possum. And they saw that of all the ones they looked at, the mice had the highest levels of tick survival. So in this study, at least, the mice weren't grooming a lot of the ticks off themselves. So another reason that that mouse is such a great reservoir. Some of the other species like the birds and some of the other rodents did groom some of the ticks off themselves. And then if we look at the possum, in this study at least, the possum groomed something like 97% of the ticks off his body. So if you ever hear people say, oh, possums are great because they eat all these ticks on your property, it could be true. They're not going around and eating ticks in your yard. They're eating ticks on themselves. And I also want to point out that this was just one laboratory study, and it's hard to know if this grooming behavior would be similar in the wild. We think it would be somewhat similar, but you know, it's hard to test that in the wild. It's a lot easier to test it in the lab. So just take that with a grain of salt. So now I want to talk about deer. And I know when people think about black-legged ticks, or deer ticks as many people call them, the first thing people think of is deer. And we know deer has a big role to play in this Lyme disease cycle. But it is important to note that deer do not transmit Borrelia burgdorferi, and that's a bacteria, again, that causes Lyme disease. So deer do not have Lyme disease. They don't carry this bacteria. If a tick that's infected with this bites them, they don't pick it up. However, they are a very important host for adults, and they're important for reproduction. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If you think about a deer, they're a pretty large animal. So they have a big body and they can support a lot of ticks on that body. So if you look at this poor deer here, you can see the ears are absolutely covered in ticks. And I imagine other spots on this deer's body look similar to this as well. So one single deer can support a huge number of ticks. And if you remember, the adult ticks especially like feeding on these larger mammals like deer. And so to be able to successfully feed, that adult tick needs to be able to get a good blood meal, and then it'll drop off and lay eggs. And so the deer play an important role in the tick life cycle that way, even though they're not necessarily contributing to the Lyme disease bacteria, they are contributing to tick reproduction. So there's been a number of studies for over the last several decades that have looked at the relationships between ticks and deer, and it's not always clear. So there's been a number of studies that have looked at removing deer, and then they would measure the impact that it has on the tick population. In some cases, they did have, by removing deer, they did have a definite reduction in the tick population, whereas other studies was not really able to show that same pattern. So there's probably something more complicated going on, but like I showed you, it's sort of this complex web. It's not just deer, you know, there's not one kind of silver bullet thing we could target. So some of the studies that people have looked at include deer exclusion fencing. And this is the idea just to keep deer out of an area. If you keep the deer out, they won't be able to drop those ticks into the property. And then those ticks aren't there to lay eggs and start a new generation of ticks within the area. The only problem with this is that deer can still go along the edges, and so they can still drop ticks all along the edges. And really what the research has shown is you have to have a really large fenced in area for this to have any impact. I mean, large. And even then, the smaller animals are still going to get through. The mice and the squirrels are still going to go in and out, and those can also carry in and drop those ticks there. 4 poster stations is another method that has been studied and used for controlling ticks on deer. And so basically it's just a feeding station that has cracked corn or something in it, and it has these 2 rollers, and these rollers are impregnated with an insecticide. And so when the deer sticks its head to get food, these insecticides are deposited onto the deer, and that in turn kills the ticks on its body. This has shown to be effective, but the only problem is you need to have a lot of them within an area. And it's also pretty high maintenance because you have to keep the feed filled and then the insecticide applied. So it gets quite expensive, which is why probably a lot of different communities have not tried to use that. So weather and microclimate play a huge role in tick survival. So like I said before, ticks are spending most of their lives off host, and they're incredibly sensitive to temperature and humidity. And you may think, hey, we're in Maine. If they're so sensitive to temperature, how are they surviving our winters? Well, it's because they know how to survive our winters. So what they do in the winter is they'll go underneath, and they'll be in the forest, and they'll be under the leaf litter. And that light leaf litter above them acts as an insulator. And then once they get a little bit of snow on that, it's even more insulating, because snow is extremely insulating. It can be -30 outside, and underneath that snowpack, it's right around 32 degrees, which is just fine for those ticks. Perhaps even more important than temperature is actually humidity. And we know ticks are extremely sensitive to humidity. If it gets too dry, they will dry up and die. And so they need to be about 80%, they need to be in about 80% humidity. And you may think again, well, Maine definitely is not 80% humidity all summer, thankfully, because we do not live on the Gulf Coast. But again, they're seeking out areas that are humid. And, you know, if you were to pick up a clump of leaves in the forest understory, it's often very damp in there. And so here was one study that looked at the percentage of tick survival over a 24-hour period. And they looked at a few different humidity levels. So 80% sort of the ideal, and then 60%. So you can see after 8 hours, the survival rates were similar for ticks at both humidity levels. After 16 hours, the tick survival at the lower humidity level dropped by about half. And after 24 hours, the ticks at the lower humidity level basically all died. They weren't able to survive even for 24 hours. So it doesn't take long for these guys to dry up and die if they're not in ideal conditions. So, and then I want to talk about plants. And I think this is cool because I think sometimes when you think about ticks, you think about their hosts and you think about diseases, but you don't always think about how do plants play a role in all this. But we know that invasive plants are linked to increases in ticks and tick-borne pathogens. And the reason this is, invasive plants particularly can form these really dense thickets. So here in this picture, this is a picture of a preserve in southern Maine, and you can see how dense all this understory is. I believe this is all Japanese barberry. And if you didn't have a walking trail, like you would be in trouble trying to get through here. That would be difficult. And so you can imagine a tick that loves humidity, loves to sort of be insulated from any changing temperatures, would really thrive in these sort of conditions. Because under these thickets, it is very humid. And not just the ticks, but a lot of the tick hosts also do really well in these sort of conditions. So imagine if you're a little mouse and you're living in the woods, this would be a great place to live. You know, no predator is going to be able to get in and get you. You'll be pretty safe. And so I imagine the mouse populations and the rodent populations would be pretty high in these areas. There are some invasive plants that also produce fruit or berries, and these are also very attractive to a number of tick hosts, like deer and mice will then feed on these, and then it just kind of creates this cycle. So the 4 plants we have here in Maine that are considered especially linked to ticks are barberry, honeysuckle, buckthorn, and bittersweet. So I want to talk a little bit about land management and some research that has come out of our lab. So we've had a couple of recent graduate students, and they were looking at a couple of different topics. So Christine, who just graduated, was looking at the impact of timber harvesting on tick populations. And she found that areas that have been harvested recently, so within the last 5 years, had significantly less ticks than areas that haven't been harvested for at least 20 years. And she also tested the temperature and humidity in these areas, and she basically found that these areas are hotter and drier. And if you think about it, it makes sense. You're cutting down trees, you're opening up the tree canopy, more light, more sunlight's getting through, you're getting more airflow. So it makes sense they'd be hotter and drier. And we know ticks don't like hot and dry. And then Sarah, another master student who recently finished, she was studying the impact of, or she was measuring tick populations across Acadia National Park. So she actually found that ticks were more common in an area that was burned in the big 1947 fire. And if you're not familiar with your Maine history, this was a huge fire on the island of Mount Desert Island in 1947. So this area in black on the map is all the area that was burned. And this fire actually changed the landscape of the island. It changed it from being predominantly coniferous to hardwood. And this is the area that most of the ticks are in now in Acadia. And ticks tend to do better in more hardwood or deciduous forests because they tend to have more leaf litter, they tend to be a little more humid, where sometimes coniferous forests can be pretty dry and the understory vegetation can be fairly sparse. So it's kind of amazing that an event that took place, almost 80 years ago is still impacting ticks today. All right, so I'm going to move on to tick prevention, but before I did, I just wanted to see if there's any questions that had come up about the behavior or ecology.
Yes, this is
If
Richard.
anybody wants to
questing.
jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, did you have a question?
Yes, so this is a question about questing. You're talking about grass versus small shrubs.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm in the woods, the small shrub, 2, 3, 4 feet high is a place where the adult tick would be going through this questing process. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they're usually 1.5 to 3 feet up high, the adults are. So yeah, they would tend to be at the top of that kind of level of vegetation. And then the younger ticks in the earlier life stages, the larvae and nymphs, tend to be lower. So more like on the top of like the dead leaves on the forest floor.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else want to jump in? Go ahead.
Okay. All right, let's move right along. Okay, so let's talk about tick prevention now. And I just wanted to talk about some land management strategies. I wish I had more for you guys because I know you're all landowners and you're probably here to try to find more ways you can manage ticks on your own property. But I do have to say that is a big area of research that we're working on in our lab, and I'll talk a little bit about the study that we're hoping will lead to more answers in that area. So if you're thinking about land management, you have to think about what do ticks love? And we talked about they love that high humidity, they love the dense undergrowth, and they also really rely on a large host populations like rodents and deers. And so some of the things you can do is, first of all, think about if you have any of those invasive plants I had mentioned, you might want to think about trying to control or remove them if possible. So by removing those invasive plants, you won't have such dense thickets of plants. Also, if you have areas that are good habitat for mice, such as stick piles, and I will admit, this is a picture of a random stick pile on the edge of my yard that, you know, like we cut down trees and you all the little bits that are too small to cut into firewood, you stack into a big pile and you say, oh, I'll chip it. And then, you know, a few months, 2 years go by and now all you have is a stick pile that is supporting a very healthy mouse population, which is really not ideal for what you want to have in your yard. Also, if you have really messy bird feeders or wildlife station feeders that, like when a bird flies on it, lots of seed spills out, all that seed that spills on the ground is probably going to be attracting rodents. And so you might want to think about either switching to a bird feeder that isn't so messy, or they do make some different things, or you can put under your bird feeder to kind of catch the seed so that it's staying up. And it's not creating such a mess that's going to be attracting a lot of different rodents. And then finally, I know some people like to see deer or they like to hunt deer on their properties, but if you don't want ticks, you really want to try to not feed or encourage deer to be on your property. So as I showed you before, deer can carry a large number of ticks on their body, and they're carrying primarily the adult ticks, which when they're done feeding, they're going to drop off and lay eggs. And you probably don't want that tick to drop off and lay 2,000 eggs in your property. So, you know, just think about if there's ways you can sort of not encourage deer to do those. Okay. I just wanted to quickly run through how to identify these 4 invasive plants that we know are linked to tick populations. So that way, if you're interested in removing them from your property, you can kind of get an idea of what you're looking for. So the first one are shrub honeysuckles. There's a couple different species here. They tend to be 6 to 12 feet tall. And then they have these very distinctive flowers, which I'm sure everyone as a child pulled it open to drink the nectar. And they're typically white, yellow, or pink. And then in the late summer, they develop this very distinctive globular sort of dark red to dark orange fruit, and it's very soft and squishy. It has a very thin skin. Asiatic Bittersweet is another one to look for, and this is a woody vine. It tends to sprawl over vegetation and climbs trees. If you look at the leaf edge, you can see that it has these sort of teeth or these wavy edges. And the fruit starts off green, and then in the fall it turns this really brilliant orange red, and it's gorgeous. And that's one of the problems, is because people like to cut it and then put it in their holiday decorations and their wreaths and their Thanksgiving and Christmas decorations. And then when the holidays are over, they just chuck it into the backyard or their woods. And then of course all those little seeds or berries can then or move to a new area where they can start to grow out of control as well. So, you know, don't decorate with bittersweet, or if you do, make sure you're either burning it or at least throw it away into the garbage so it's not ending up on your property. So there's a couple of species of buckthorn here, which also can create really good tick habitat. These tend to be kind of like a small tree, about 20 feet tall. super nondescript little flowers. You hardly will even notice them. And the fruit goes from green to red to this sort of purple or black. And you'll often have multiple stages of fruit on the tree at the same time. So I know when I see it out in along wooded edges, I often will see it's very distinctive in that I see the red and the purple fruit on the same plant at the same time. Finally, Japanese barberry. This is a very kind of easily recognizable plant. It's a dense woody shrub and it has all these little spines. You can see a couple of them here at the end sticking out. And it has these sort of butter colored flowers. Teeny tiny little leaves are only about 1 inch long and they're very narrow at the base. And it has very distinctive fruit. It's this red oblong fruit and it tends to hang down off the branches. Okay, so personal tick prevention. One of the best things you can do is when you're going to go out an area you know has a lot of ticks, you want to wear light colored clothing. So if you're wearing dark jeans and a black t-shirt and you have one of those black-legged nymphs on you, which are the size of a poppy seed, you're never going to see it. But if you're wearing khaki and white, you have a much better chance at seeing that tick and being able to remove it before it attaches. Not the best fashion statement, I admit, but if you tuck your pants into your socks, this just keeps any ticks that are crawling up you on the outside of your clothing. So if it were, you know, a tick, you're walking through some grass or you're walking through the forest and a tick latches on here, it'll start crawling up looking for a place to feed. And if you don't have your pants tucked in, it'll just be able to find a spot right here and then it'll have a pretty good chance of being able to find a spot to bite you. Of course, you can always wear insect repellent. Insect repellent with DEET tends to be some of the most effective against ticks, and that works very well. If you don't like spraying insecticides on yourself, which, you know, it's not pleasant, you can buy clothing that's treated with insecticides, and that's also pretty effective against ticks. So you can either buy products to treat them yourself at home, or you can buy clothing that are pre-treated, you know, at places like Elo Bean or Insect Shield is another one that sells it. They also have a kind of cool program where you can send in your own clothing to them and they will apply their product to your clothing. So you don't have to worry about the mess at home. And I think it lasts for like 70 washings. It's pretty long lasting. So after you've been outside, probably the most important thing you can do to prevent tick bites is to perform a tick check. And that just means check yourself carefully, make sure you don't have any ticks crawling on you. If you do, remove them before they attach to you. It's also a good idea to change out of your clothing. And you don't want to just throw your clothes into the hamper and then go about your day, because if you have ticks on your clothes, they can then crawl out of the hamper and then find their way back to you or a family member, which, yeah, that's no good. So if you throw your clothes in the dryer on high heat for 10 minutes, that's enough to kill any ticks on there. If your clothing are wet, you need to make sure that you continue to dry it until they're fully dry, because it's not the heat that's killing them, it's a lack of humidity in this case. And just remember, ticks can be extremely tiny. So here is a great picture the CDC released a few years ago, which if you ever go to a TikTok, I guarantee you this poppy seed muffin will be in there. So here they placed 5 ticks on a poppy seed muffin, and they're so hard to see. So here are the ticks here, and here are some poppy seeds. They're very small, and you really have to train your eyes to see them. So to recap, wear your protective clothing, use your repellent, and most importantly, do your tick checks. If you do have a tick that gets attached to you, the best thing you can do is to remove it right away. And the best way to remove it is to attach it to grasp it near its head by where it's attached to you and pull straight up. You don't want to grab by the body up here, because if you were to pull it up here, there's a good chance you'll leave the mouth parts and the head still attached to you. And if you leave the head attached, remember that the pathogens are often in the salivary glands. So it's possible that even after you remove half of the tick, you could still get a pathogen transmitted to you. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, my parents did like some crazy things to remove ticks from me. I always got them in my neck, which is pretty common for children because they tend to be shorter. And so I know my dad would try to burn them off with matches, or my mom would try to use alcohol to get them to wriggle out. And I just feel very fortunate that my parents never set my head on fire. So yeah, don't do any of that. Like, let's not do the crazy things our parents did to us. So don't cover it in petroleum jelly. Don't paint it with nail polish. Just get some tweezers and remove that sucker as soon as possible. Because we know the longer it's attached, the more likely it is to transmit pathogens. Okay, so before I wrap up by talking about the Maine Forest Tick Survey, were there any questions so far on any of this?
Oh, another question from me. There's a common, perhaps wrong idea out there that it takes so many hours for a tick to transmit a dangerous bacteria. Is that true? I mean, if it's there for less than 24 hours, what do you know about that?
Yeah, no, so that is true. And so we know, at least for the more common ones like Lyme disease, we know it really has to be attached for about 36 hours. Some people say 24. I think doctors say if you can remove it within 24 hours, you're probably okay. It looks like it probably takes about 36 hours to transmit any pathogens. And the same, I believe that's the same thing for anaplasmosis. I will say Powassan virus, that is the exception. It takes very little time to transmit the Powassan virus, though luckily that's extremely rare here in Maine. Last year there was just one case in the whole state. But yeah, you're right. If you can remove ticks generally within the first 24 hours, you have a low risk of contracting one of those diseases. Were there any other questions, or should we move on, Jen?
I see someone asking about moose. Andy wants to know. I know that they're definitely getting impacted by the increase in ticks.
Yeah, so the moose tick. That's a big problem for moose. It's not a problem for human because they're just really on the moose. And the problem is, you saw that deer that had all those ticks on it. I don't know if you've seen pictures of moose with moose tick, but they can have so many ticks. They're basically, all their blood is removed from their bodies, and they're basically dying from blood loss, and it weakens them. So they're more likely to get sick. They're more likely to have issues surviving the winters. So yeah, they are a really big problem, and they seem to be a growing problem in the moose population, probably because we have had some milder winters, which have probably allowed the tick populations to do better than they have in other years. Hopefully that answers your question.
And there is another question, from Catherine, should you tuck your shirt in as well as your pants?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt, because what a tick will do, it could spend anywhere from like 10 minutes to 2 hours searching for the ideal spot to bite you. And so as long as the longer you can keep it on the outside of your clothing, the better, because then you can get home, change your clothing, and it never had a chance to bite you. So you can. If you have to do anything, we say tuck your pants into your socks. That's probably the most important.
You mentioned DEET as a repellent. What about promethium? This stuff seems to be fairly common spray on your clothing.
Yeah, so permethrin, yeah, that was the insect shield. That's what they treat their clothing with, and a lot of the pre-treated clothing that you can buy, they're treating with permethrin, and it does seem to be pretty effective against ticks. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'll go through this last section, and then I'm happy to take any questions at the end or anything you guys want to chat about. So I'm going to talk about the Maine Forest Tick Survey to wrap things up. And this is a really cool project that I'm really excited to be a part of. And this is a citizen science project. And it's kind of cool because it's an interdisciplinary project. So the three principal investigators on this project are Allie Gardner, who's an entomologist that studies vector-borne ecology, and she's the PI of the lab I work in. Dr. Spinarski, she is a social scientist, and she studies human dimensions of wildlife. And then Dr. Jessica Leahy is in the forestry department, and she studies human dimensions of natural resources. And so sort of at the intersection of all these different research topics is sort of where the Maine Forest Tick Survey was born. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Oh, and we also have Stephanie Hurd. Some of you might be familiar with her. She does research studying how timber harvesting intensities impacts tick. And I know she's working on a number of different properties in southern Maine. And I know she's collaborating with different members of the Maine woodland owners to survey their properties. So this is what she probably looks like when you see her in the field. This is what she looks like in real life when she's not covered in tick gear. But I did want to mention that you might be seeing her out and about in southern Maine this year doing a lot of research down there. So the purpose of the Maine Forest Tick Survey. So we're trying to understand the relationship between forest management practices and ticks and tick-borne diseases. So we know people manage and use their land in a wide variety of different ways in terms of when they're harvesting their timber, how often, how selective are these harvests. Some people are just sort of selectively cutting for firewood. Some people are removing those invasive plants. Some people are setting up wildlife sort of feeding areas. So we're really interested how all these different ways that you guys manage your land, how does that translate to what the tick and the tick-borne diseases are doing in that property. And so we want to also help landowners understand their own unique risks. So the landowners that are volunteering are going to get a report that will show them the ticks they have on the properties and also what pathogens those ticks are carrying. And then we're hoping by running this study to finally be able to develop some recommendations on how landowners can reduce their tick-borne risks on their own individual properties. And then finally, a big component of this project is community outreach and education. So we want to take all this information that we gain and go out to these different communities, especially these communities that have really big problems with ticks and tick-borne illnesses, and talk to them and try to help them figure out some things that they can do to protect their communities. So in order to accomplish this study, our volunteers or our citizen scientists are going to be doing two different things. The first thing is they're going to be filling out some pretty extensive surveys about how they manage and use their land. And they're also going to be collecting ticks on their own properties. And they're going to be collecting ticks using a drag cloth. And this is a very simple but scientific method to collect ticks. So a drag cloth is just, it's like a piece of white cloth that's weighted on one end and a person pulls it with a rope on the other end, and they pull it over the top of low growing vegetation. And what happens is those ticks that we're questing, as that cloth goes over them, they think, oh, hey, this is a host. I'll grab on and I'll try to feed here. And the person who's collecting has to stop periodically and pick the ticks off, because eventually they do wise up and they'll start to fall off. So here's our timeline for the project. So this summer is the very first year of the project. So this July, our volunteers who we are currently contacting now and getting set up. So if you haven't heard from me yet and you did submit your name to be part of this project, I will probably be in touch with you soon. So our volunteers are going to collect ticks this July, and then once we get them back, we're going to identify them to species. And then over the winter, we're going to be sending the ticks off to Griffin Dill at the Cooperative Extension Tick Lab, and he's going to be doing the pathogen testing for us. Next spring, we're hoping to have the first year's results available, and we're going to make summarized results available for the public, not just the people who participate in the project. So make sure you check out our website next spring, and we'll post some of the results there. And then next year, we're going to repeat this whole project over with a new set of volunteers. So if you're interested in collecting ticks on your properties and learning more about what pathogens they carry and what species you have, you can go to our website and you can sign up. There's a Get Involved link, and there's a little short survey you can just fill out to express your interest. We are full for this year and we have a pretty extensive wait list, but you're definitely welcome to sign up and express your interest for 2021. So I just want to go over quickly a couple of tick resources. So if you want to learn more about ticks, there's some really great resources here in the state. So the Cooperative Extension Tick Lab has a great service where you can submit any tick you find for free, and they will identify it to species, which is great, because then you'll know if it's a dog tick versus a deer tick, and then by knowing that, you'll know kind of what sort of risks are associated with that tick. They will also test your tick for pathogens for a fee of $15, which is actually quite reasonable because most states charge $50, but luckily they only charge $15 here in Maine. They also have this really cool map this year, and this is a new feature that they've launched, which is they are showing tick data in real time. So as people are submitting ticks to them, and they're testing them for pathogens, they are going and uploading those results to this map. So you can click on any town across the state and see how many ticks have been received, and of those, how many pathogens are they carrying. So for example, I just clicked on Blue Hill, and it seems about 46% of them are carrying Borrelia, which again is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, which is pretty high. There are just a couple ticks that were positive for anaplasma, and they didn't have any ticks that were carrying Babesia. So it's kind of cool because you can see what's going on in your own individual town. The Department of Health and Human Services also has a lot of really great information on their website. So if you go to their website, maine.gov/DHHS, and you go to their disease surveillance epidemiology program, you can read all about the different vector-borne diseases in the state, both from ticks and mosquitoes. And then if you want a super in-depth read, if you thought some of the ecology stuff was interesting and you want to learn more, there's a great book that talks about sort of the things I was talking about today. And the book is called Lyme Disease: The Ecology of a Complex System. And it's really fascinating just to read and kind of think about how connected everything is and why Lyme disease is such a complicated problem. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I just want to say thank you for spending your afternoon with me learning about ticks. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
There is a question from Kathy about, are you partnering with University of Rhode Island's tickencounter.org? We are ground zero down here. A lot of great resources on the website, including tick testing and tick spotters database.
Mm-hmm. For this project, I'm not sure if Allie has partnered with them before. I am aware of the lab, and they do a lot of great work out there. But for this project, we're trying to focus more on Maine and woodland owners in Maine.
And then from Andy, what about picaridin for a repellent?
Oh, yes. There has been some studies that have showed that does work. I want to say it's not as effective as DEET, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I do know it is one that has been shown to have some repellency against ticks.
Does anybody want to jump in and ask a question?
Yeah, this is Richard. I'm one of the ones that volunteered for the project, and I just got my rejection letter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I'm really thrilled you're doing this, and so we're still going to be interested.
Oh, good.
Thank you anyway.
Yes, we had over 300 people that wanted to be a part of it, and we're only able to take 125 this year. So we're hoping a lot of those people will be interested in doing it next year so that we can try to get as many people involved, if not this year, then next year. But I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, Elissa, do you have, I'm just trying to think if you had a slide with your email address on it.
Oh, shoot.
But no big deal. I was going to say put it in the chat, but the chat goes away once the program's over. So,
Let me.
but I will. Let me think here. I will be putting this video on our website, and you want to? There you go. And
yeah, it's just my name, Elissa Ballman, at Maine.edu. Hopefully, you guys can still see that on the screen. Okay. Yeah, if people have questions, I love talking about insects and ticks, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this presentation or about anything ticks related in general.
well, thank you so much for doing this for us. This was really informative and it's timely. And
Mhm.
it seems like it's the latest data, which I think this changes a lot. I think there's a lot
Mhm.
of new information as you learn more. And this tick survey is probably going to give you more information. So we'll see you again
Yes.
soon with,
Mhm.
hopefully some of the results from your data.
Yeah.
For everybody here, I invite you to come join us for our next program. It is going to be on the American chestnut, the recovery efforts that are being made here in Maine through the American Chestnut Foundation. It'll be very interesting. Again, another scientist from one of our colleges here in Maine who has been doing extensive research on using genetics to work with recovery of the American chestnut. And that will be on Thursday, the 18th of June. You can find all of our programming information on our events page on our website, mainewoodlandowners.org. And then you just register like you did for this program. And we'll continue these programs through the summer. We'll keep everybody up to date when we have new programs coming up. So thanks again. And if you're not a member, we hope you will become one. Membership is a big part of who we are as an organization. And hope to see everybody again soon. Thanks again for, like Melissa said, giving up your part of your afternoon to learn about ticks. And we hope you
Yes.
have a great rest of your week.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Melissa.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
very much.
Right. Bye-bye.